guys, Boba here. So I want to talk about Bendy and the Ink Machine. It's had a lot of history, and it's left people in a state of mixed feelings. Before we begin, don't forget to like and subscribe. Our goal is 100 subscribers, and I'd love for you to be part of that crew. I'll be putting out content weekly. Now let's grab our tea and begin. Bendy and the Ink Machine was a hit that took off in 2017, and honestly, the hype was unreal. I remember playing the demo, and Bendy was just a torso behind some boards. The potential of the game was actually quite thrilling. On top of that, releasing a game in chapters was kind of a new concept, at least in comparison to what I'd seen. This method of game release actually left the fans wanting more. They were full of speculation and curiosity. What would happen next? At the time, Bendy's main competition was Hello Neighbor. Since both of them fit into the suspense category, everybody was hyped for these two. However, while Hello Neighbor was getting progressively worse per build, Bendy and the Ink Machine's popularity just grew more and more. But the question I'm looking at today is, was Bendy and the Ink Machine actually good? Now we're going to break this into 3 categories. What made Bendy and the Ink Machine great? What were the negatives? And my thoughts. So let's start with talking about what made it great. Remembering back to the game, one of the many draws that I had was the art style. It was that old Steamboat Willie aesthetic that made it feel really classic, but with a twist. As someone who's a cartoon lover, especially for the classics, this was an attraction for me. Highly stylized games feel unique, giving it a fresh and distinguished look compared to others. The atmosphere's design fits perfectly for the suspense and horror aspect. Dingy muted yellows and blacks for a dark and murky area, which gives this unsettling feeling that things are old, dilapidated, and something is hiding just around the corner. And oftentimes they were. Character design was also perfectly fit for the theme too. Emaciated, mangled Bendy, horrifically scarred Alice Angel, and the many massacred Borises. They all just left us feeling like it was a hellscape. After painting this picture for you, now you can see that this game was visually on point. On top of that, the music was very well done. But what really sold it for me was all of the fan music. Fan music was scattered around in the chapters, along with little cameos of lore bits from the popular creators who just loved the game. Some of those people were DA Games and Jacksepticeye, for example. It was a great nod to people who'd helped bring exposure to the game. On top of fan music, there were contests that allowed artists to have their pictures featured if they won a spot. The Meatly showed the growing fandom that they saw and listened to their work, exciting the people more and more. On top of all of this, there was this mini Where's Waldo game you could play. And you do this by finding these Meatly cutouts hiding behind false walls after hitting certain criteria. It became a thrilling hunt for people who were curious and determined players. And for people who broke the game, they'd find Bendy cutouts that say wandering is a terrible sin. As the community became more and more hyped, excited fans began to theorize about the game. After all, the game was released in parts, and everybody wanted to know what was happening next. The community was on the edge of their seats, wondering where this story was going, and hoping their theories were right. Now we need to transition into what made the game great within the game, rather than the community. For me, I'd say chapters 1 through 3 were probably my favorite. This is due to there being a drafting room within the game. When you'd exit and return, the little pictures on the stands actually changed. It was a cute little head turner if you stumbled back and realized things had changed. I think chapter 2 had a really great ending. After you get chased by Bendy down the hall and lock him away, you meet Boris, who you would really just know nothing about. I wish there had been more to that ending, more chasing and wondering if you'll make it, but it's not really a negative, just a slight wish. Chapter 3 for me has the most mixed feelings, but if we're sticking with the positives, just talking about these chapters, I would have to say that the original Chapter 3 really had solid gameplay. There are these stairs that the player was forced to walk up and down just to find tools, and this left the player more exposed to Bendy, who was walking up and down the stairs, and led to some of the most thrilling and heart-pounding moments when it first came out. Ink would fill the hallways, and you could see Bendy just struggling to walk down the stairs. When I first saw it, I couldn't help taking a small video and taking some screenshots. I just never expected to see something like that. But on top of that, the stairs allowed you to notice that there was a room full of ink and hint that there might be a hidden puzzle somewhere. Once again, that became a very interesting way to capture people's attention, especially the people who were looking for all the hidden stuff. Now we need to talk about the negatives. This is probably my least favorite part of this video. Since Bendy and the Ink Machine is an all-time favorite for me, I have to be honest, it's got flaws. Like any game, of course, but these flaws are glaring. The first issue I have is the story is disjointed, and I don't really understand the motivation. This is especially true if you just play in one sitting. For example, your whole goal is to escape, and then you suddenly become very attached to Boris when he gets taken away. So you end up going after him to save him. But why? Why that sudden motivation to change? We've seen Boris at the end of Chapter 2 and barely had any real interaction with him in Chapter 3 other than he just stands in an elevator. I mean, I guess you could say him shaking in fear of Bendy was an interaction, but not really. Now I'm speculating this, but I'm pretty sure people became attached to Boris because of that waiting period in between both chapters. People were speculating and hoped for Boris. They weren't sure if he was good or bad, and most people leaned towards good. They built this artificial connection that people in one sitting didn't really have. Now, the story shift as a whole was fairly unexpected. I think if there was more dialogue from Henry, it probably would have helped. Things like, the more I try to escape, the farther I get dragged down by everything. How do I escape? Then instead of meeting Allison and Tom straight away in Chapter 5, have them leave notes in a journal or audio recordings in previous chapters. Allison just came out of nowhere. If you have these journals or audio recordings, have Allison talk about how Bendy is manipulating things so it's harder to escape, and Alice is creating a problem. Make us feel sympathy for everyone trapped here, forcing Henry to feel the guilt of creating Bendy and then leaving the company. He already seems to feel some sort of guilt, just let him see how things have spiraled out of control. This would allow for a very clean transition from escaping to stopping Bendy. It's a natural progression rather than a disjointed mess. Yes, it somewhat happened, I'll admit, but it just wasn't in a way general players would understand, and it was pretty weak and uncompelling. I discussed Chapter 3 earlier, and I think it's really important to go discuss those negatives of Chapter 3. When Chapter 3 was changed, I was very disappointed. I was so disappointed that I really didn't want to play Chapter 3 anymore. When Chapter 3 first came out, one of the problems with it is that it was so long. I recorded an old video and it took me 3 hours to beat Alice Angel's fetch quests from hell. The fetch quests were boring and tedious, and as I mentioned earlier, its saving grace was that implementation of the stairs. In the newest update though, in an attempt to try and shorten the fetch quests, they moved all the items to a specific floor. This completely negated the need for stairs. It was just easier to use the elevator to get to the floor. Honestly, it made it almost silly to find the lore room and to use the stairs in general. Because of this, the chapter suffered because Bendy was rarely in sight. If Bendy was barely in sight, that ruined the whole thrilling part of the chapter. When I played it again after the update, I just never saw him. Had they simply cut out a quest, or at least put less items to find, this would have been an easy fix that didn't make the chapter boring. Now I want to talk about Chapter 5, and this isn't really a complaint, it's more of confusion. I have a lot of questions. Why do we need this mirror that only gives us commentary, but no real added bonus? Why does Sammy come back? Why do the ink people suddenly start attacking you? Why does Allison and Tom suddenly become hunky-dory with the player? Why did Bendy become a hulking monster? Why did the chapter ending happen when you put in a tape? Who put Bendy's tape on a random throne? The truth is, there was so much teased and so little given back. I was so disappointed by the ending and how odd it seemed. I remember I just put down the game and didn't want to play it again. Now I want to talk about my thoughts on the game as a whole. If we step back and put ourselves in the mindset of someone who wasn't part of the community at the time, who didn't see all the hype, who didn't theorize and didn't speculate, what would we think? Taking away all the context, The game was okay. If you're looking for a game where you don't have to think too hard and just play for the ambiance and art style, this is perfect. Turn off your brain and enjoy. If you're looking for something that has well put together lore and mysteries, this isn't the game for you. Instead, I'd recommend Hollow Knight. That's much better. Overall, I think the real joy of Bendy and the Ink Machine was just the vibrant community that generated content and kept the hype alive. It was the music, the art, the stories and theories that made this game memorable. And there's honestly nothing wrong with that. Just walk in with no expectations and have a good time with a decent game. Now, I'd say that Bendy and the Dark Revival has fixed a lot of these issues. They've added stealth, better lore, and characters that talk more frequently and add to the gameplay. They actually listened to the community to fix those problems. Sure, some events felt scripted, like with the Ghost Girl, but it felt really good to play. There was unfortunately no real chase scenes from Bendy, but I enjoyed it and it was forgivable with everything else. Especially hearing his voice or seeing the animation when you die from Bendy. Those were really awesome. I think that the multiple endings were pretty good too. It gives me a chuckle sometimes to see. The Dark Revival overall has a more consistent and well-written story. I'm glad that they took the time to really flesh it out more. This story just gave so much needed context to the original game. I would think of this as a remake, and I think this game would be what you want to play instead of the original. Now that's all for me. If you have any comments or suggestions for a new video topic, you can put them down below. Otherwise, I'll see you in the next one. Bye!